Not on the video, that's good. So Jen and I and our family are now living in Dallas. We've been there for a year, but before being in Dallas, we lived in Midway, Utah for about 3 years. This is a picture looking down into Midway. We got our first stoplight while we were living there just a couple of years ago. And this picture is taken from kind of the shoulder of a little mountain peak called Wilson Peak. And so we actually, our house backed up to a hill called Bergy Hill, behind which was Wilson Peak. So we had a view to this straight up our backyard to Wilson Peak. And we got to learn about the history of that while we were living there. And it turns out that Wilson Peak was named for our Wilson family. James Brigham Wilson, who would be Grandmother Wilson's grandfather, was one of the first homesteader settlers of Midway.
So Dave, here you can show it right there.
Yeah, go ahead and click on him if you want.
There's James.
So Marion Wilson, her dad was David J Wilson, who married Mary Jacobs, and David's father was James Brigham Wilson.
Okay.
1856 to 1949. Mom, I don't know if you remember, I talked to Met the other night, and he said he could remember going to family reunions at James Brigham Wilson's home while he was still alive in Midway.
It was, they called it something, and I know it's still called that. I'll try to remember what it was, but he sat in a chair, and he was the oldest thing I'd ever seen. He had completely white hair, and he couldn't really move much, but he sat like a king, and he looked over all of these children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and he'd say, not a
scrub. Not a scrub.
Yeah, not a scrub. Not a scrub.
Which he knew about from Wilson Peak.
He was very handsome in his young age. I mean, I saw pictures of him at grandmother's house, and even as a young girl, I knew that was a handsome man.
So he came and he dug some of the first irrigation trenches that are still there that Jen and I would be familiar with today. There's if you go on a bike ride, you can go up Pine Creek or you can go up another creek, and those are both kind of main ditches that he helped bring into the valley. But one of the really cool stories in there, and he was a real character apparently. I've learned some really kind of fun stories from him, but I'm going to tell one tonight about how Wilson Peak got its name. And this is one step further into apocryphal story here with my telling of it. Because I heard this story from a 4th of July picnic talk that somebody gave at the town center. And I cannot remember if this was actually James Brigham or if it was one of David J's brothers. But this would have been either him or one of the sons. I know it was not David J. So we're going to say James Brigham, and I'm going to correct this next year. But so it was time for power to come to the valley. There was no electricity in the valley yet, and James was recognized as the best horseman in the valley, and was tasked with going up to the top of Wilson Peak. I've hiked Wilson Peak, and it is no small feat, just kind of bushwhacking down. It's very steep coming if you go straight down right into Midway. And to this day, you go up there, and there are that's where kind of all the power cables run, and it's.
But it was named after him.
Yeah, so he went up. So he got volunteered to go up, and he basically, for everybody who's seen Man from Snowy River, remember when he comes like riding along and like everybody else stops because they're scared, and he just goes like straight down the face of the mountain. So that's basically what he did, carrying a big wooden spool of electric cable that he held with two hands behind him as he rode down his horse down the face of Wilson Peak.
Unspooling it?
unschooling it and bringing power to the valley. And so that's the story of your relative and how Wilson Peak. Another just aside, while we were there, I was kind of trying to start my own company, and I named it Wilson Peak. So I've got my email domain is david@wilsonpeak. You can follow up with any questions. One other thing to show on here, George, if you click on memories. Yeah, so this is really cool. So you can download an app on your phone called Family Tree that is this same thing, Family Search. And if anybody's interested, you can just do a free account. And granddad and grandmother are on here, and you can go through the generations. But there's been a lot of these kind of pictures and stories loaded. Just go down to documents. Click on this first one. So I was actually trying to find this story that I was telling to make it less apocryphal, and I wasn't able to find that story. But for example, you can go find these like memories, and these were written by a bunch of his grandchildren. If you scroll down to the last one, it's a memory from Marion Wilson. So I thought I'd just share that. It's Family Tree or Family Search app.
Yep, here we go.
Just really cool stuff.
There it is,
on
right there.
Go click back to the Family Tree part.
Do you want to read this or?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in other words, that's mom.
That's your mom.
It's your mom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember his white hair above really strong.
Read it, Dave.
Can you
Yeah.
read it?
Yeah,
Sure.
can you read
Okay.
it?
So when I think of Grandpa Wilson, I remember his white hair above his ruddy, strong outdoor face. I also remember his crusty way of saying tender things. I believe he liked to be a tough guy. Most of what I remember is how my father, David J, loved and respected his parents. He never spoke of his mother with one word. She was always my angel mother.
Oh.
She was the epitome of goodness to him. His eyes would get damp when he remembered her, always praying in Welsh. He didn't ever think of Grandpa as an angel. He loved with gusto his father's political maneuverings, his stubborn toughness, his humor, his prejudices. He would tell stories about what Grandpa had said or done and laugh almost uncontrollably. He took tremendous pride in his father, as we all did. Whenever Grandpa went into Dad's law office, which would have been David J, which he shared with Sam Powell, a good Catholic, he would say, "Hello, Brother Powell, are you any closer to seeing the light?" The family reunions in Midway were joyous occasions for me as a child. Seeing family I enjoyed so much. I remember Grandpa would nearly always say, "Look at that bunch, there's not a scrub among them." He deserves a lot of credit along with his angel wife.
Oh, that's great.
Is Lauren?
That would be
here to
Margaret
tell the story
Powell,
told
right?
Last night?
Yeah.
No,
I think so.
Margaret Powell, yeah, it's right there. Yeah. So you see, and yeah.
So we'll keep moving, but I found a couple of other short, kind of fun stories I'm happy to share with anybody if you'd like. But go back to the family tree, George.
Yeah.
And let's just click on Mom Wilson, click on Grandmother Wilson. And just go to memories again.
Okay.
Or just stay right there, yeah. I mean, so it's just really precious. And go and find
Oh, look at handsome granddad in the fun one.
gorgeous. Oh, look at Granddaddy.
Yeah.
So that's it. So I'm going to share one other story.
Dado, can I ask you, so is that grandmother on the top left? Are those all?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
her.
And is
Yeah,
she,
that's her and granddad.
is she bottom right middle?
Right here.
She looks like Grace May in that
Keith,
bottom
Mary,
middle one.
and Jay.
This would be her family's picture coming up. Ah, there it is.
Oh yeah, there they are.
Oh.
And Marion's on the left.
Yeah, there she is.
And Dawn.
Sweaters.
And Margaret.
Margaret's
Look how cute Margaret
little.
is.
David J.
With her little page braid.
So,
J was an initial.
what's that?
David John.
John.
David John Wilson. That's her father.
Because I
No, the brother.
Jay.
Was it
Oh,
Jay?
Jay.
No,
Jay.
that's
Yeah.
But Mom's hair was a matter of some concern to her sister Margaret, because she said your mother's hair always looked so beautiful, and the more she walked in the rain, the more beautiful it got. And my hair was always so straight, and my mother would be combing it, and she'd be telling me how wonderful it had been to comb Marion.
Ouchers.
So the other story I wanted to share tonight is a John Hansen story, and then I thought what we would do, if anybody else just had something they wanted to share, I just wanted to open that up, and then we've got some great videos to go into after that. So this was an experience I had a couple of years ago. One of my freshman classmates and close friends and basketball teammates at Stanford is named Kamachoni, who has remained a very close friend. And a couple of years ago, he got married to a girl named Marisa Brudico. And so some close friends of mine and I were at the wedding, and at the dinner the night before, I got to know Marisa's family a bit and her parents. And I'm always drawn to Italians. I had lived in Italy for a couple of years, so we kind of hit it off on, they were still very close in their ties to Italy and would go back. And I was visiting with Rudy, who's her father. Rudy and Diana are her parents. And in our talking, he brought up this obviously huge interest in his life, aside from his career, which is really giving his time and means and effort and heart to cancer research support. And in particular, he talked about building a registry for bone marrow donors. And so, and he said, I think he had even mentioned going to Seattle for this a couple times a year. So I asked him if he knew John Hansen and thought that he must. And he immediately was shocked and said, "How do you know John Hansen?" And I told him he was my uncle. And tears just came to his eyes. And he just talked about how much his family revered John and Marianne and the Hansen family, and that his wife had cancer. She was diagnosed with leukemia and was not supposed to live. And they were offered, or became aware of an opportunity to go try something very experimental up in Seattle, and they lived in LA. And so they went and were in Seattle for about 2 months, I think, and it was exactly the time when Marianne was also there, going through kind of their parallel experiences, and they became very close. And he talked about the Hansens actually having their family down to Sunriver, and allowing them to use the house here, and just how meaningful that was. And it turned out that Diana was the very first recipient of a non-related bone marrow donor that was made possible through John's research, and she has lived, and she's seen her 4 children. Marisa at that time was 10 years old, and she's lived to see all of her 4 children grow up to adulthood and now have grandchildren. And Marianne is their angel, and John is their saint. So I wanted to share that story.
Thank you.
Yeah. Love to listen.
Thank you. Love to you.
So if anybody else would like to share something, you're welcome to, and I think we'll just be quiet for a minute, and then if not, we'll go to
I have a very brief one about John Hansen, whom I love dearly to this day.
Can you speak a little bit longer?
Do you want to come out here?
Yeah, could you please speak longer? I've told a couple of people this already, and it is very brief, but I had one of my very best friends contracted lung cancer that metastasized to his spine, and it was a no hope deal for him, but he had one of his assignments to just get through this was to go to Seattle, and I didn't know so much about what John did or what exactly where he would be versus where my friend Greg was. So I emailed John Hansen from my work computer at late in the afternoon that I have a friend up there. I just wonder if there's anything you can tell me about his update or chances. His email back to me was before I left for work, so it was within a half hour I got an email back from what room is he in? Greg was gone by that time, but John's response has made me love him more.
Thanks. Can we share the one from Lauren last night?
Why don't you share it?
So James Brigham came up last night, and Lauren said that he remembered David J talking about his father one time, and he shared that on a Memorial Day when David J was a young boy, they were out putting flowers on the different graves, and there was they came upon this one gravestone that had kind of a Dutch, it was a Van Houten or Van somebody, and young David J said to James Brigham, "Dad, should we put a flower on this grave?" And James Brigham said, "I fought that man over land, I fought that man over water his entire life. I'll be damned if I'm putting a flower on his grave now." So Dave says he was a character, he sounds like a character. And then I'll share one about John, actually, and Suzanne. So back in 2005, I was having some health issues as well and ended up losing about 60 pounds. And I couldn't figure out what the problem was. And I came to Sunriver that year, and John looked at me and said, I looked worse than usual. And had a good talk with Pargy about it. And then invited me a few weeks later to come up to Seattle. And he arranged for me to go to the University of Washington Medical Center to meet with some specialists. And I ended up staying up there for 3 days in the Hansen home. Nick was so great. I learned a lot about his lizard and many other things while I was up there. And they were such gracious hosts, taking me to and from the hospital and through these battery of tests and following up afterwards and making sure all the medical records got back down to my doctors in Orange County, and eventually led to me being the pudgy person I am today. Which really endeared them to me even more than I felt before.
I have early and strong Sunriver memories of my dad chasing people around with his needle and bag. Especially, for some reason, Melissa and Jen. Didn't want that, but for some reason he wanted your blood. So that's wonderful. But I also think that it struck me a couple times. We always joke about how we've got a lot of Matts and a lot of Daves and a lot of Johns. Mm-hmm. And we're down a David and 2 Johns. But it's so wonderful to be here with all of you, and so many wonderful memories of all of them.
Love you.
Thank you.
I just would say, sorry, Nick, that just watching this family interact together, that I think grandmother and granddad and the Johns and Daddy and all these wonderful people must feel so much joy in the legacy of these people and how beautifully you all carry on and what a difference you make in this world for love and for good. So way to go.
Did everybody know about the meaning of the little
Ben's
on the
shirt.
shirt
Ben's
that
shirt.
Ben did? The shirt that Ben.
Yeah, have
Ben's
Ben's
on.
up.
Yeah, over
Yeah.
there, right behind you.
Yeah, Marcus is wearing it. Marcus.
So like 2 weeks ago, maybe a little more, Amy emailed and said, what if we did a shirt for the reunion? And I said, that's a great idea, and I'm honored, and do we have time? And then I thought of the old reunion shirt from sometime in the 80s, the white one.
That Madeline wears all the
Oh
time.
my God.
Don't forget your IR.
The car that's like strapped down with everything, it's like bursting. There's something just so perfect about that. But I thought we were due, and because most everybody had worn through those shirts, I imagine. And yeah, I was touched, and the next day I was at work actually, and I took out a piece of paper and like sketched out a tree, because I loved the idea of you drawing out family trees for significant others and trying to help people understand how everybody connects together. I drew a tree, and obviously in the shape of a heart made sense. And then as I was drawing like sort of the second draft, I thought, well, what if each branch, 6 branches for each of the second generation, and then what if we had a branch for every single person and their children, and then what do I do? We have a tree here, so let's go and make a bird for the people who passed away, and that made perfect sense. And so yeah, you can kind of figure it out if you count the branches.
Find your branches.
Yeah.
It's a great piece.
Yeah.
You did a heart around every
So
And putting Brian's bird out at the end, it was just, it was all, I felt really responsible and lucky to do that. And actually have the original drawing in my bag over there, so if you want to check it out. Yeah.
In the original drawing, there's also M and M initials in the heart, but that didn't come through in the
Yeah,
print.
a few
But
details were lost,
yeah.
but it was made a great choice with blue, and I was really honored for sure.
Awesome, John.
Thank
Thank you.
I have a few ideas that will be forming as I speak them. They're generating, but I was sad to miss David's memorial, and I'm sure this was said more often than anything because it was so fundamental to him. But one of the things I love best about him was how much he loved Connie, and that's also one of the things I love best about grandmother and grandfather is how much they loved each other. And I just felt like Connie must have paid really close attention growing up with her parents and saying that looks really good. And then she found someone who would love her like that, and he always did. And I remember one of my main memories of him is praying, which was different than my childhood lifestyle, and I didn't quite ever understand the timing of it. And we would live in the house and he'd go gap, and all of a sudden why not? Life is sacred, so pray away. But I remember one time he was saying something about Jesus is Lord and Savior thing, and then he goes, Connie is my Savior. He interrupted his own prayer to say. That's how much. Yeah. And then I have also as I'm sure the Bennions remember recently from losing their father and the outpouring. I've been very overwhelmed by the outpouring about my dad and getting all these private messages and texts, and Ben is always what are you doing? I'm I'm sorry, I got another one. I got this really sweet email from a friend, one of my best friends from growing up, who was my senior homecoming day. Brett, he died of leukemia. He developed leukemia shortly after we went to college, and he died while we were in college. And his girlfriend Leslie was also a good friend of mine, and they were really in love. So even though they'd gone, I think he went to UCSD and she went to Michigan. And when he came home to Seattle for treatment, she moved back to support him. And I think due to how rapid, he had a really aggressive leukemia. I think due to how rapid it was his older sister already had a wedding planned, and his family was just staying the course with the wedding. And so he's in hospice and the wedding is happening. And they never alter that, which I love about them. And so I totally didn't even ever know this, but Leslie wrote me to say, one of the things I always remind he offered the parents, Dennis and Penny, hey, we'll come over and be with Brett. So the whole day you guys go to the wedding and we'll take care of Brett. And that's what they did. So we're also neighbors. So they spent the day with Brett while the family was at the wedding. And that Leslie was saying how she didn't even want to go, and so she like put on her like party dress for the wedding and was just like hanging out with Brett. And then like Suzanne kind of encouraged her, like, oh, you have a good time. And anyway, she was also just like talking to what a sweet. She was saying she kind of like captured their personalities, and she's like, your dad was just like very peaceful and like didn't say a lot, but he was like, you know, just it was reassuring to have him there, and that Suzanne was like a really like active nurse and making Brett comfortable and like engaging me in conversation, and that was also like something. Just like Suzanne's love for my dad in the last few months was just like also so can't even find an adjective for it, but like the 24/7 nursing and just like the almost like you know, it's a marathon. So yeah, that email really touched me too, because it sounded like I could picture it too, that kind of those personalities around that deathbed. But yeah, couple thoughts.
I would like to share a memory of David Bennion and John Morris, and both involve a bicycle. Many of you will remember, I'm sure, that when my mom was very ill, David had made about the best bicycle you could possibly have made, tandem, so that my mom could ride. And I think for health reasons, I don't think she was able to get on that bicycle a lot, but that was incredibly meaningful, just a wonderful expression of David's caring and thoughtfulness. And I do know in later years that bicycle did get a lot of great use. And one year, David and I went for a really long ride together. He was in the front, I was in the back, and he was very big, wonderful man. So much of my view was David. Of course, I had great, beautiful views on the side, in addition to my frontal view. So I couldn't go wrong there. And one thing that really struck me about that day was the passion and appreciation that David had for nature and beauty. We went quite far. And it was a really good workout, and we had a lot of time to talk together, and so much of the talk was about how beautiful life and nature were. It's a conversation that stays with me this very day, and something I really appreciate. My memory of John Morris, again, there's so many, but the one I'd like to share also involves a bicycle, and that was right around the time that Kavi was joining our family. And I don't know if it was your first Sunriver or one of the first Sunrivers, but we went on a long bicycle ride with John. Were we on the tandem? Yeah, you and I were on the tandem. John was on his own bicycle, and John was incredibly patient and kind, especially to Kavi. So we had a lot of time also to talk together as we rode, and he took us out to lunch in a really beautiful place. And it was just a really, really wonderful time to spend together. He could not have been more kind or more thoughtful. I don't want to speak on behalf of my amazing better half, but I do know that John, both during that ride and more broadly, was especially welcoming of Kavi into the family. I was very, very thoughtful in making her feel comfortable joining this huge and wonderful family.
Would it be okay if I told you a little thing?
Please, yes.
If there's someone that maybe is an actual Wilson that wants to go before me, I'm happy to.
You're a real Wilson.
Wilson.
Yeah, real deal.
Whether you like it or not.
So I've been thinking about this for about 3 days now. And when I saw Amy's email about Wilson family night, it's gonna be tough to get out. I also come from a big family. The name of that family is Stewart, S-T-U-A-R-T. We have a deep, rich tradition on the other side of the country from here. I don't think I know a Stewart that has ever set foot in Oregon. I guess I get to report back to the Stewart family. How was it? Let me tell you what. So, One thing that I think is interesting is that I feel like I have a ton of Wilson's family stories. They might all involve Stewarts, but I have, our family isn't as big as it used to be, and I see a lot of you guys that are, you guys have a lot of strong and deep feelers and lovers amongst each other. You all really, really, really care for each other a lot, and it reminds me of my family a lot. And I feel like that when I stepped out of some of the things I have had in the past and transitioned into this one, that it was no different. It's the same family. It seems like this is my 20th Sunriver. It seems like I've been here the whole time. And it's, you know, it feels like every story that you tell about a guy like dark screen there.
James Brigham.
Yeah, about James Brigham and about David J and all this stuff. I've heard all those same stories before, and I feel like if I told a story from what I've got to relate to, that it would be exactly like the stories that you guys get to tell to each other. And I have to tell you that it feels like that you guys have been my family the whole time. Just like I feel very grateful that you've, like Peter was saying, how you've welcomed Kavi into the family. I feel the same way. I feel like I'm very grateful for that, and that I feel my family in you as well.
Thanks, Rocky.
Thank you.
We love you.
We love
And as somebody who has been the first person, I guess, to marry into the family, I feel very fortunate.
Yeah.
Very fortunate. Very lucky.
I remember at John Morris's service, so many people talked about his live updates on his heart rate stats, and you know, it was generating from his watch. I think it was a watch and a heart monitor he wore. And I got one of these GPS watches that I wear when I run sometimes, and it's funny what makes you think of things, but I think of John Morris all the time. Whenever I check my stats, I'm like, I wonder if I'm anywhere close to what John is. He's, yeah, just little things. I mean, I just remember him a lot. We can go to a video.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. All right.
Wait, I have a question.
Yes.
Do you have the old videos from a long time ago?
Yeah, I think we have those. So I think we're gonna see a new one and then some old. So people, I think we can do whatever.
This was part of the deal, part and parcel of being in this family forever. Is I've got all this data. I got all this data on you.
This was the first time we've really done something like this. So if this was good, or if we want to have suggestions for next time around, I think Amy's your girl.